Welcome to Inside the Vault with the NCBA. I'm your host, Peter Gwaltney, President and CEO of the NCBA.
This episode of Inside the Vault is brought to you by RiskScout. RiskScout is a commercial BSA platform that streamlines complex compliance in verifying, onboarding, and managing emerging market businesses, such as hemp, cannabis, private ATMs, crypto, MSBs, and more. Built by a team of former bankers, regulators, technologists, and fintech professionals, RiskScout removes the BSA AML business obstacle of risk underwriting and due diligence through automation to help banks scale growth, not overhead. Where others see risk, we see opportunity. For more information, visit www.riskscout.com. To learn more about how you can be a sponsor of Inside the Vault, visit www.ncbankers.org and search for sponsorships.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me in the Vault today. We have an exciting episode for you today. We're going to talk about emerging issues, non-traditional banking markets, BSA compliance, and a host of other things during our time together. And I'm joined by two good friends that I want to introduce to you. Melissa Marsal, Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer of Westtown Bank, and Justin Fischer, CEO and co-founder of RiskScout. Melissa and Justin, welcome to the Vault. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Peter. Good to see you.
Thank you, Peter. Happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I mentioned in the intro that we're going to be talking about emerging markets, non-traditional markets for banking and such. But before we go there, Melissa, you're the EVP and COO of Westtown Bank. And for those who are listening who aren't familiar with Westtown Bank, describe the bank a little and what makes your bank different.
For sure. Well, first of all, I want to just say, Peter, you said emerging markets, fun stuff, and compliance all in one breath. So thank you for that. That doesn't happen often.
That's pretty ambitious, isn't it?
It's very ambitious. So hold on to your seats, folks. So Westtown Bank and Trust is actually a community bank that thrives in different environments. We love to go after things that everybody else is not going after. Niche markets. I think we're now again calling these things emerging markets, underserved markets. There's a laundry list of what we call them, but it is something we've always prided ourselves in doing. We have a big space in guaranteed government lending, which, we focus on verticalities like solar lending and some other markets. But with that, we also focus on markets like hemp and cannabis that no longer get the attention that they need to get or have been underserved for far too long. So that is what I believe Westtown Bank and Trust is a non-traditional bank that really focuses on underserved markets. And again, making sure we understand those markets and cater to those markets, and most importantly, partner with those markets.
Outstanding. Well, I look forward to learning more about all of that later on in our conversation. Justin, you're the co-founder and CEO of RiskScout. And for those who aren't familiar with RiskScout, describe what your company does and what motivated you to start the company.
Yeah, so thanks, Peter. So I've spent about 21 years building software solutions for banks and credit unions. I've worked with every size institution in the country, however, mostly Main Street institutions, community financial institutions. Got a heart for that group. And essentially a few years ago, we started to see a bunch of businesses in our own communities that weren't being banked. I'm actually a fourth generation farmer. My dad, we had a produce farm in South Texas over about 80 acres or less. So small farm, very difficult to stay profitable. He went into construction for the last 2 decades. Now as of a year ago, he's been planning his hemp farm and he's going to retire and start banking hemp. Well, personal story, he's with the local bank in Main Street there for 30 years, and they have no idea. So they're likely going to kick him out. And we started to see other sort of predatory situations happening with lending and these sort of things. So we thought, hey, this might be a good thing to help institutions bank not only new markets, find new growth revenue opportunities, but actually bank right in your own backyard. We're not talking about Texas and North Carolina having to go all the way out to California for THC. We're talking about right in your own backyard. And as we built the software, one of the things that we realized is that it wasn't just hemp and THC. Traditional businesses like money service businesses, ATMs, which have been in the community for decades, are highly profitable, underbanked, challenged in terms of BSA. If you ask any banker about them, they'll say, no, thanks, I don't want to do them. And it's really a function of regulatory issues and, lack of education. And that's a lot of what I'll kind of highlight today. But we help institutions grow like Melissa's institution, and a number of others across the country. Super small sizes, especially, have grown quite a bit, 40, 50% in their deposit growth. So I think, the biggest thing for me, last 20 years, I've been seeing money center banks, of course, dominate. They spend on technology. They make it hard for community banks to fight. So that's the 800-pound gorilla, right? We'll call him the gray gorilla. Now there's a pink gorilla, and he's a fintech, 800-pound gorilla that's also beating up on banks and disintermediating their customers. So, I've talked to a lot of CEOs, especially in the last year, who are literally looking at selling their charter or, essentially business as usual, but business as usual is not doing it for them. So looking at additional markets may be a lifesaver in a lot of cases.
Fantastic. Well, risk is not inherently bad. It's what bankers do. Bankers manage risk. And it sounds like you've come up with a way to manage risks that banks may have traditionally walked away from, that they can now manage more effectively.
Yeah, we forget sometimes too that these markets like ATMs and MSBs, one of the slides I always put up is Elon Musk and PayPal back in the early 2000s. If you had seen these two guys come through your branch, would you have banked them? Probably not. 98% of banks would probably not have banked them, but you know how that story turned out. They tend to become commoditized over time, right? So it really isn't, a long-term higher risk issue if you manage it and you mitigate the risk, and then it, of course, will commoditize. So, do you want to be in the, not even the early wave? The early wave's kind of passed, but do you want to get in and on board with helping these businesses in your community bank and grow your deposits, fees, lending opportunities? It's a good thing all around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Peter, I always tell everybody too, when we're talking about this, and I think this is often unseen and unheard, many institutions are banking them. They just aren't banking them knowingly or banking them the right way. So for us, and I think other financial institutions that work with RiskScout, we recognize we're already banking them. Why not go ahead and monetize on it? Why not go ahead and say, this is a great market to be in, recognize the market, find ways again to mitigate the risk. And then we once again have set ourselves apart, and we're supporting the industries that are underserved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Melissa's actually spot on with that. We see a lot of institutions who either don't know they're banking them, or when they do, they tend to not kick them out, all of them out. And there's an issue in BSA with that. If you make exceptions because it's the nephew of the board, a high net customer, you're creating challenges for yourself. I've seen banks, change their compliance program every month because of those exceptions. That's a horrible way to stay, above board on the examination side. So I also just recently saw a very large institution who was kicking out a high net customer who does about $10 million real estate portfolio loans every quarter, $10 million. And they're recalling those loans and kicking him out purely because he has a 5% interest in a CBD company that's in one of those retail stores. So where do you draw the line? And I think the biggest thing that I want to make sure everyone takes away is education. So first, before you throw the baby out with the bathwater, before you throw those customers out or make exceptions for them, understand them. And then to Melissa's point, if you're going to do a few, then do it right and go after the market, And I think that's the big point here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Melissa, I remember you called me a few years ago, right before the pandemic. And, I find that we're all marking time, pre-pandemic and
yes.
today. And it was a few years ago, it was before the pandemic, and you called me to ask about hemp. And we had a follow-up call with our in-house counsel, Nathan Batts. He joined us, and he's quite an expert on the legal and regulatory implications of hemp. And that was the subject of that call. That was quite an education for me just to sit in and listen to that. And so at that time, you were doing a deep dive and doing your due diligence on the potential market for hemp for the bank, and then eventually took what I would consider an aggressive approach, as you've been describing, in terms of banking customers who are involved in the hemp industry. How did you get your board and your management team to a yes in pursuing an emerging market like hemp?
Justin hit on it, Peter. Education, and part of that was those conversations with you and Nathan, and saying, look, it's North Carolina. We're here. We're trying to bank it, and of course, we have a national presence, so we are banking this in multiple states. But of course, North Carolina is near and dear, and we want to hit home there. help the farmers and do everything that's right. We did it by exactly what you said. We went head first into this, going to conferences, talking to the industry, going on site visits where they were actually farming and producing, getting ourselves into the market to be what we deemed as subject matter experts, so that we then could take all that data, create an economic impact result, show that to the board, along with creating a compliance program that shows, okay, this is the gain, this is the risk, this is how we mitigate the risk. And it was so ironic because as we sat in a room, and we sat in a room for a solid week with compliance management and other members. Justin was part of that with RiskScout. And we said, how can we do this? And let's start risk scoring. Let's really get into this. And when we were done, we all looked at each other and said, this is actually low risk. So when you really do look at it and all the things that you can do, but again, we understand that it's going to still be looked at and deemed high risk. So I don't want to take away from that by the comment that I just made. But when you really start educating yourself and understanding what is at risk, and again, the mitigation portion of it, it's not that scary. I mean, I had a room of compliance people excited about banking hemp. I mean, again, see, we just did that. We made compliance exciting again. So that was key to it. And again, with Justin and RiskScout, that's what gave us the levers to do this more on a national footprint and volumes. Because, unfortunately, and I don't want to despair how other people do this, but if you go into this thinking, let me hire 22 BSA people, you're not going to be profitable. It's not going to make a whole lot of sense to do it. So you do need some sort of platform. And yes, I'm going to push RiskScout because they're an incredible partner to us, but you need somebody or something that can help you look at the laws of the various states, that can help you with the risk mitigation, that can help you with checking out that customer, keeping the license up to date, all the things that we need to do. And then show again all of this to the board, which we did. We also called our regulators and we said, this is what we're going to do. Do you mind looking at our program and making sure that you don't have a problem with it? And again, early and often keep the board engaged. So a unanimous vote to bank it. So that was truly exciting. But again, it was showing them the facts and showing them that we had done our homework. We had a team of people ready and dedicated to do this. We had resources like Justin to pivot to, and again, showing the economics and the value add. And it was a slam dunk. And then monthly, we keep them up to date on our hemp business, our hemp program specifically, along with our newly launched cannabis program. So it's a continual education.
Yeah, I'll add one thing to that, Peter, if you will. You said we'll have to come up with the term pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, but we were coming online with Melissa right around that time. And, they're not overly branch specific, but one of the challenges that institutions have across the country is the pandemic has essentially shut branches or reduced traffic at the very least. And if you look at the state, I spent a lot of time in online banking. I was one of the original guys at Q2 eBanking, spent a lot of time building business banking solutions. But the reality is there's no major carrier, no major product for business online account opening out there. In fact, if you go to Chase or anywhere else who might have even a link, it's a very narrow window that they'll actually open an account on. And I'm talking about traditional business, not even high risk businesses. Mm-hmm. And so if you think for a second, okay, well, Melissa had, maybe a few farmers, people coming into them, they were seeing them at events, but this pandemic has created a problem in terms of face-to-face relationship building. What do you do? And so part of RiskScout, which tends to blow people's minds, I think, because we are a BSA system in that way, we do the compliance side, but we had to build an entire onboarding structure. So, we actually kind of shot over what commercial online account opening would look like. And here's the reason. Melissa, when they turn their light on and they start talking about hemp, they get several hundreds of businesses every month that come in. They're not going to bank them all. And this is an important distinction for banks to know. Melissa wants to bank the people that fit her risk profile. She wants to bank the people who are good relationships. And she's doing the heart of what community banks should do is bank the relationship, bank the person and the family and understand them, not just, wholesale because they're in hemp, kick them out. Right. But, a lot of institutions don't want to do things like smokable hemp or smoke shops, for example. And that's totally fine. There's a great middle market of processors and cultivators that you can work with. They're farmers like my dad who, have 40 acres and say, I'm going to take this 40 acres and do this and do produce on the other. There's all kinds that come through the space. And so one of the challenges, though, is imagine if you turn this on. We're actually working with a bank on the West Coast that turned on a hemp merchant processing program. 48 hours, they had 2,000 applications. They shut the entire program down because they had no automation to filter any of these guys. Imagine that for a second. Your new accounts team, your team's thinking maybe 20, 30 new customers come in a month, and now you've got 2,000 applications to review. Just a peer review, even if you're not onboarding them, is a massive amount of time. And you can see now why it might scare some institutions to say, whoa, I don't want to do that. So one of the things we do is we put filters up, obviously specific states, specific types of products. And so that helps Melissa's team not have to deal with the ones that, for example, startups. If she doesn't want to do startups, or she wants to take a specific, angle on startups, she can do that. And so that's the important part. It's more of an onboarding, business verification, ongoing compliance play. And if you look at the market out there, there's some great BSA products, Verifin, Abrigo, for example, but they were never built. They were built 20 years ago, first of all. They were never built to communicate to the customer. So when you have an alert or something in there, like let's say, I'm a farmer at Melissa's bank and I do $100,000 wire to China, right? That's suspicious in nature. It may not be a suspicious transaction, but that's suspicious. How does she find out why I sent that wire? Well, she calls a relationship manager. Relationship manager calls the commercial customer. That can take 2 to 3 weeks to get information back. In terms of when we looked at this for hemp businesses, we said that's too long. I mean, you need to be able to be on top of this a lot quicker, not just with the monitoring, but with the communication. So we send a task and the business is actually a user in the system. And so we have them literally take a picture of a machine they bought from China and they had to wire the money, and they take a picture of an invoice. And that way your suspicious case can be closed because it's a relevant business purchase, right? That kind of compliance hasn't really happened in banking, where it's almost immediate, right? Versus, this long circuitous route, and every now and then the BSA officer will pick up the phone and call a customer. Melissa has really great relationships with the customers, so they're really in touch with them. But most institutions, that gets, bifurcated across different groups and, ultimately very, very slow. And so if I'm a compliance officer thinking, oh, I have all this overhead and I have this very bureaucratic kind of process, yeah, I'm probably scared to death of him, because I'm like, how am I going to stay on top of it? I mean, Melissa mentioned it earlier. We like to say we're a partner. Technically, we're classified as a vendor, but we're a partner because these things change every day. Things change in the States. Things change in rules and regulations, and the different guidance that's coming out. So it's important for us to share that with Melissa. Her team reaches back out and says, hey, we see that they have this license, but do they need this license too? And we can help them confirm that information. Even a great BS officer who really researches can't be on top of all those state laws and all those situations that happen. And so our compliance team, which is an ex-OCC examiner, BSA officers, on multiple levels, have really just, they're in the middle of it. So that's kind of where we come into play.
And I will say that this too, Peter, because this is another kickback we've heard, or I've heard of other financial institutions, and let's make sure we clarify. I am not outsourcing my BSA and compliance to RiskScout. You cannot do that. You should never do that. Right. What I am doing is using their platform and their resources as an added tool for what we write, what we deliver, what we monitor, and what we sit before the regulators and say, yes, sir, this is what we've done. This is how we manage it. So I think that's a key thing that we need to make sure we all understand.
Yes, and that's a very good clarification to make. Can you talk about you talked about thinking of turning on the merchant processing system and having 2,000 just requests overwhelm the system. Let's talk about the growth trajectory for hemp and cannabis too, because cannabis is legal in how many states now?
All 50. It's federally legal, and all 50 states have adopted a hemp licensing program.
Okay, so what does the growth trajectory look like when you're looking at this as a potential market for a bank? Melissa, I'll start with you.
So this is the hard one, because you gotta look at your own bank and you gotta say, what am I trying to do here for us? And I know a lot of banks are sitting on liquidity right now, PPP and all kinds of things, but again, because we're a huge guaranteed government lending shop, my goal and my project and focus is on deposits. So, this world of hemp and cannabis, they just need a bank. Now we'll talk about lending in a minute and how that lines up. But, to get deposits to fund loans, I'd like to turn that faucet on and just let it keep running, but we also have to roll back and make sure, okay, how much of these deposits do we want? And what does that look like? Because, Peter, the sky's the limit. I mean, if we, just like Justin just gave you, if we took everybody who came knocking, we would probably have very much excess deposits, very excess underinsured deposits, all the things we need to look at. So we are careful about, matching sort of our deposits with our loan growth and making sure there's no gap there. So those are our projections relative to our own balance sheet. But what I'll say is it is going to be a moment in time where we have to call the timeout card. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be a matter of, okay, 50 million in loans is what I want, and I probably won't get there for another 3 years. If that is my goal in 2022, just as an example, I can fill that bucket pretty quickly. So, and typically these are non-interest bearing accounts. So let's go ahead and say, let's look at cost of funds. So those are all great things in this market that we look at. But again, keeping our eye on, could this be perceived as concentrations? Could this be, and again, this is all back to risk mitigation. And if I'm going to fund these loans, what's my secondary funding source? Do I have borrowings? What am I going to do to balance this out if this goes away? So all these things come into play, but to long-winded way to answer your questions, we are projecting, several million in volume in non-interest bearing accounts for 2022 and doubling that in 2023 as we balance this with other deposits, because obviously I don't want an entire, balance sheet that's just full of deposits from one industry. And that's any industry, no matter what it might be.
It sounds like there's lots of room for other banks to join you in banking the cannabis hemp
Absolutely.
industry. And one of the things I especially appreciate you, Melissa, and Westtown Bank is as I watch you on LinkedIn and other social media, you're all over the country speaking at conferences and panel discussions. And you and Justin recently participated in a panel discussion at our one of our conferences here in North Carolina, and just sharing with the industry what the opportunity looks like, how to manage the risk, and what the opportunity is. You're not trying to keep it all to yourself. And that's, I really appreciate that about what you're doing.
Yeah, we appreciate the industry for sure, Peter. And I will say this too, hemp is a big focus and will continue to be a big focus of ours. And I do not want that to go unnoticed. I am excited, especially in North Carolina. We're seeing a flip to textile and to, really industrial hemp. My God, talking about helping the farmer. And Justin trumped me on the farming thing. I did not grow up a farmer's daughter, but I did grow up barn and tobacco, so I know all about it. But if we can fill that hole for farmers, that did get socked, they didn't have a good time out of the gate, and they're still sitting on, lots of things and that they should have gotten sold. A lot of things went wrong. We need to fix that, but I do see a lot of really good stuff going on where it's getting fixed. And again, we're seeing a pivot to textiles. You're seeing some big players. You're seeing some things happen in RTP. I am so excited about that. And that opens up also some more lending opportunities for USDA loans and some other things. And I try to spend my days, I hope I can get a deposit relationship or a loan out of it. But if I can connect industries and I can help make sure they have a partner somewhere, whether it's our bank or whether it's just another partner that could help them with processing or selling or consulting, whatever it is, I really am passionate, and our bank is passionate, all of us are, about collaborating and helping the communities, because that's very important to us.
Just add real quick that it's a five trending to $6 billion market that was only $1 billion market a few years ago. Cannabis is now over, cresting $23 billion when it was a $7 billion market a few years ago. There are hundreds of thousands of licensed farmers and cultivators across the country. Just in North Carolina alone, I think we're trending over 3,000 or 4,000 now, right, Melissa? Most of the big agricultural states like Texas, Tennessee, for example, several thousand. But she mentioned something really important. A lot of the original hemp was grown for CBD, right? And you see that, and that's basically saturated, and it created a bit of a push and pull. Early days, it was very highly sought after, and farmer could get probably 10 to 20 times their like a cotton yield, for example, on profitability. But what's really interesting is, like Melissa says, the industrial hemp clothing construction. I mean, you can walk into Home Depot now and find hemp flooring, hemp wood flooring. You're building houses out of it, especially with the lack of materials right now. But also another interesting thing, I was talking to one of the top 5 accounting firms, and they called me to do due diligence. Large number of massive CPG brands, so consumer product goods like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and also just like Johnson & Johnson, they're looking more and more at taking CBD and putting it in their products. There's a little bit of an issue right now with the FDA in terms of approving that, but there's legislation that's moving forward that's going to force the FDA to make that decision. If that opens up right now already, and it's an international market in terms of CBD infused beverages, it's massive. So you've got these things that are really interesting. Livestock feed, also in ranching states like Texas, hemp is a really amazing feed, right? But hasn't been fully approved in all these places. So there's a lot of interesting things that are coming about. And then I'll tell you, like Melissa, I spend a lot of time working with the Department of Agriculture, which is not related to RiskScout's business, directly, but I speak. I generally have a session called "Your Bank Doesn't Hate You; They Just Don't Understand You," right? Because they generally just get kicked out. They don't get any information. So, the reality is over 50% of people who run a hemp business or a related business, could be greenhouse lights, are financially insecure. They do not know whether they'll be with their bank in the next month. I mean, we're talking about seasonal family farms who are doing, pumpkins and then doing an acre of hemp that people can grind up in their coffee, which, by the way, you could buy on Amazon for 20 years. You've been able to buy that stuff on Amazon. So we're not talking about necessarily even a smokable product or anything else, just general farmers, doing this. So it's a really fast growing market. They're looking at potentially around 8 billion in the next few years. But again, it could blow wide open on that side. Plenty of businesses. I get about 300 visitors a day to my website. That's Verleaf, where we help the businesses find banks. And it's honestly, it's really sad, Peter. I have people that turn around and go, I say, hey, yeah, why don't you talk to Westtown or talk to another bank if you want one in Texas or whoever you would like. And they go, well, how much do I owe you? And I say, people charge you to introduce you to banks, predatory loans at 30%, these businesses are paying. Like, it's just Square, who's the largest CBD merchant processor, has been notorious, especially during the pandemic, of freezing over $60,000 worth of funds for 180 days just because they have to go through manual compliance review. And these are mom and pop businesses, right? So it is definitely a challenge for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember visiting a CBD shop about 3 years ago, and I did it just to see what was there and to ask. And I'm just notorious for asking questions of store owners and business owners, just asking about their banking relationship. And he had just lost his banking relationship and was in search of anyone to process his payments. He was only able to take cash at that time. And so, it's evolved since then, but it's been a painful evolution. So, Melissa, you were talking about, well, I've learned from both you and Justin, just the various uses of hemp and the applications of hemp beyond just what the average person thinks of. I'm curious about your portfolio, Melissa, at Westtown Bank. What does the composition of your portfolio look like in terms of growers, farmers, retailers, processors? What can a bank expect if they get into this business?
All of the above. And again, that is what I love about it. And I hope to be a pioneer. And again, we just talked about concentrations. I'd like to see, as we evolve this, NACES codes be more evolved and not just be hemp or cannabis. Let's talk about the difference between a retail CBD and a processor and a lighting company and all these sort of things. And I think we can, and we are. So ours is everywhere, Peter. We've got, we've got the farmer. There's a lot of good vertically integrated, and we love those. We've got, where they're doing all the processing, they're doing everything in house, and even having the end product. And now again, with this new fiber and textile, that we're really seeing that be in a whole grow and all the way up. Justin mentions one of our largest, greatest customers is a lighting company that they provide greenhouse lighting for anything you grow in a greenhouse. But because they provide it to the cannabis industry, guess what? They are flagged and they got kicked out of their bank. So it's everywhere. And it's a good thing. But to your point, the merchant processing was another gaping hole that we found in this. And we were fortunate enough to be able to do a joint venture deal a couple of years ago with Westtown Payments, because we kept having a line of people at conferences saying, I'm getting kicked out because of merchant processing. So we're like, well, why? I mean, what's going on? And to Justin's point, the big players didn't understand it. They don't know that it's okay to do. You just have to make sure you do it right. So here we go. We start Westtown Payments. So now we've got that whole separate portfolio of merchant processing that is the majority is retailers and e-commerce in that segmented market.
Outstanding. Well, if you had one piece of advice to give to a bank that's considering a non-traditional market like hemp and cannabis, what would it be? I'll ask both of you.
Do it. I mean, if you want to grow and not be the same thing every day and day out and get out and fighting against the same market, against the same thing, then stay where you're at. But if you want to grow and you want to grow in a different market, and guess what else? If you want to have fun, I mean, you guys know our incredible Ross Sloan, that's our SVP of hemp banking. He says every day, I've been in banking for 30 some years and I've never had so much fun. Well, it's this industry. It's an environment to really grow, but if you're considering it, do it right. Again, connect with somebody like RiskScout. Call me. We've got a team of people that I'm happy to share anything. There's more business to go around. And again, I always tell everybody, I don't care if you bank with us, just bank with a friendly bank that is going to be open to it. But I would say open your eyes, do some pro formas, do some projections, and you will see a great industry that you should explore if you want to grow and be different.
Outstanding. Thank you for hearing that, Melissa. Justin, what's one piece of advice that you'd offer?
Well, I always say this, I say it with every call, unless someone's already running a program and they're already sort of in Melissa's case, which is few and far between, we'll talk about education. So it goes from people that think that any touch to CBD is illegal to just talking to a West Texas banker recently, and he thought all hemp was illegal. Like he didn't even understand the difference between hemp and THC. And so I think it's the education part first, education both on the market and the economic side, but also on the compliance side. So it's both a growth and a BSA compliance story. We do that. We help educate that for free, whether you want to join our webinars, or we're happy to do a conversation to check up on your current compliance program, your staffing. Some institutions are very, very, very short-staffed in BSA, and sometimes they do need to correct some of those things, but our system essentially takes about 80% of the overhead away. So that's what allows you to get to it. And I'll just tell you a little personal story here. I had a CEO of a $400 million bank take me out to dinner the other night here in Austin. And he said, hey, you're a fintech guy. You build software. I really want you to come down and hang out at the branch and whiteboard some solutions. And so where's this coming from? And it came from, is the third CEO in the past 6 months who requested this. It comes from him seeing people making money on fintech solutions where you become a sponsor bank. And I said, that's great. I said, but that's a pretty big initiative. Like you are essentially becoming a software company, trying to leverage your bank charter for something like that. And I'm not saying that that's not a good idea in general, but my challenge to him is, what's the real issue? And he said, it's growth. He said, I tried to recently acquire a branch outside of Austin and from another bank, which was how they grow, right? And his core provider, again, he's a $500 million institution. His core provider told him 13 months before they could get that project on the roster. 13 months. At Q2, I had to do those in 30 days. Like they were top of the list. Now, core providers and businesses, bigger business now are catering to the tier ones, the regional, super regionals, and the money centers. So, that's not a growth potential anymore. Or if you're looking at just purely investing 7 figures into building a branch, you've got a longer payback. So my alternative to him was, almost all of our customers have installed within 2 to 4 weeks. We don't need any major integrations, and they can start a program and start going after this space in 4 weeks. And it's all in your own backyard. Again, you're not banking California and Texas or North Carolina all the way out to California. You're literally banking businesses in your own backyard. The other last thing I'll say is sometimes institutions go, well, I haven't heard a lot about it. I don't see a lot of demand. Yeah, we're an agriculture bank, but I said, it's interesting. Unfortunately, the market has conditioned, because people have been kicked out so many times. They've conditioned these businesses, I wouldn't say to be deceptive, because there's a difference between someone who's money laundering or being deceptive versus just not providing the full story. Well, yeah, I do corn and a little bit of hemp. They just may not highlight that part because they know it gets them kicked out. They are currently in your institution today. They're going to be your high net customers, your board members. They're going to be a lot of different people there, but there are also people who don't know to come to you because they don't know that you're friendly. So they don't want to be, declined. They don't want to open an account. This is one customer recently, small shop. He has 20 people on payroll, and he got kicked out of his bank in 2 weeks, and they were called a $15,000 loan. Like, that is just horrible. If you're a business trying to, you can't move to cash like quick. And essentially, so I think the problem is that you don't really realize this, and Melissa could be, a great guide to tell you this, but as soon as you start to show your willingness to work with these businesses, you'll see a lot of them come to you, right? And, that market starts to really, be exposed. It's there. You just don't see it because they're not telling you about it out of fear of being kicked out or out of fear of, being declined.
Mm-hmm. And some of that business could be word of mouth. I'm sure the people who are involved in the business they communicate a lot, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, I have certainly learned a lot today, Melissa and Justin. I can't thank you enough for sharing with us today. And we're going to provide contact information for both of you in the information that we share on our social media channel, so our listeners who have questions can contact you directly. So we will do that. Well, I'm going to finish up like I do every episode of In the Vault. I'm going to ask you the same question. When you're not working, what do you do that gives you joy? It doesn't have to be one thing. It can be a basket of things. So ladies first. Melissa, I'll start with you.
Well, I am privileged enough to have some acreage that I also have some animals on, rescue animals, and spending time with them and just looking at them gives me the greatest joy that I can ever have.
I love it. That's fantastic. Justin, how about you?
Well, we chatted a little bit before the session about playing the guitar. That's my reminder to turn away from the screen and get a little bit creative and, decompress. But I think overall it's, I coach a lot of kids sports. So I really enjoy doing that with my 2 kids and all their friends. And, so we get out and it's kind of like my dad used to do. You drop a big bag full of everything and say, what do you want to play out on the field? So I enjoy that part, the most is getting to spend time with them.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, great. Well, we talk about business so much. I like to get to know people for being people. And I've learned a lot about both of you today, and it's been a joy. Thank you again for joining me in the vault today. And I look forward to talking to you both again soon.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Inside the Vault with the NCBA. The NCBA is the professional trade organization providing advocacy and support to North Carolina's banking industry. This series is produced in partnership with A Niche in Time Productions. I look forward to being with you next time.